So today I'm with Louise Griffiths, and I'm very excited to be chatting to her today because actually I don't know Louise very well at all, and I think it's going to be a really fascinating chat. The brief chat we've had already was really fascinating, so I'm really excited to find out more today. Just to say, if anybody's listening to this on Apple or Spotify podcasts, then you can also watch this on YouTube if you prefer seeing faces, and also the opposite is true. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you can listen to it on Spotify or Apple. And without further ado, let me introduce Louise, who's got a really fascinating story to tell about her career change. And I guess the best place to start is with what you were doing before you did this big change.
Thank you. Well, I've got a background in HR. So I started working in HR back in 1998 for a financial company in Cirencester. And it's all I ever wanted to do since I was 15. So I'm 47 now. So a long time. HR was what I always wanted. And I was working in an organisation latterly as a head of HR. So I was there several years. I think when I eventually left, it was about 8.5. So quite a long time. And during that time, I had my children, I got married, and, it was a place where I really loved working. And then in around 2019, I had a sudden parental bereavement, which was not expected. And that was the same week my son started reception. So quite quickly, I was getting a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic attacks. And that wasn't something that I'd necessarily had before. It was very much sort of, I put it down to grief and sort of, having a busy life. So that was in 2019, and that continued into 2020. So the anxiety was getting worse than the panic. And again, I felt I was sort of really struggling day to day with how I was feeling, but I kept going at sort of hamster in a wheel element of young children. I had a daughter in nursery still, so there was a lot going on. And basically, lockdown then happened. So, of course, everybody's world became a lot smaller, and still had these symptoms that I was having. And that continued way into 2020. So towards the end of 2020, it was becoming quite debilitating how I was feeling. So in that,
were you still working? Sorry to interrupt you during.
No, I was signed off work with anxiety.
Okay.
And then I had this period of time off, and during that time the company were very supportive. I can't fault them in that sense, but I said I can't sustain this full-time job, this anxiety isn't going, and they put me into a part-time role in 2020. So I had it was basically my team was put to another person, and I had a different job. So that actually to some extent should have made things easier, but actually I was still getting that anxiety. And I had a bit of I thought at the time, a light bulb moment with a friend of mine who knew me a long time. And she said, this anxiety isn't you. And I felt someone was listening, because I felt it was work were really supportive, but it was still there. Someone had said to me, you might always have this anxiety. And I thought, I don't want it. This isn't me. But it was becoming debilitating. So I was becoming fearful of everything. And as I say, a friend of mine said to me, you need to call me. I've spoken to someone today, and I think I know what it is. And I was all ears. And she said to me, I've just spoken to someone I'm working with, and she said she wants to tell everyone about her menopause story. The first time I'd heard this word, I was like, okay. And she said, this lady sounds like you, but a year on. She said she's anxious of everything. She's having panic attacks in shops, panic attacks at roundabouts, driving. That was me. Always loved driving. And the world, honestly, I could talk for hours about how my life changed, in the sense that I was fearful of collecting my son from school. I was anxious that my husband was having to come with me every day. So when she explained about this colleague, I thought, light bulb moment, it's a thing. So I started to think, okay, I'll talk to my doctor. And I did. I was 45 then. And my doctor said to me, literally, you're a bit young for the perimenopause, and prescribed me some antidepressants. I never took them. I wasn't depressed. I was very anxious. And I remember at work at the time saying, I think I might be perimenopausal. And there was some colleagues that I worked with who said, well, I'm getting hot flushes. I'm really struggling with my symptoms. I thought, well, I'm not getting hot flushes, and I've never had one. Every woman has a different menopause, and I realised that now. So that was back in 2020, and then with my symptoms, they got worse. I was having panic attacks on video calls at home, and eventually I went back to the doctor and I thought, I can't sustain working. It's not getting any better. So the perimenopause was part for now, in the sense that I was signed off work. And eventually I got to the point where I said to the organisation, this can't sustain itself long term. I'm off sick, I'm not able to work. So I left a couple of years ago. And at the time I felt bereft, is probably the way to say it. I have a lovely family life and so on, but work has always been important to me. I'd worked in London years ago. I travelled around the world. I went on my own to San Francisco, Hong Kong, business class. And this was someone that couldn't literally go to the school a mile down the road and get my children from school. Yeah. And I had comments such as pull yourself together by family members who meant well, tough love, but it wasn't helping. And I think I liken it to that balloon. It became deflated to the point where I had hardly any air left. I felt just, is this me, my identity? Someone I'd worked in senior roles. I was, worked hard, respected for what I did. And I'd had to leave my profession as I saw it at the time, because I didn't have a choice. I couldn't work. This anxiety and this panic overtook me. And I think that's why, through no fault of my own, or, no choice, what it actually did turn out to be was the perimenopause. And in 2021, when I left work, I was fortunate to quite quickly land some HR consultancy work based at home. And that's I'm still doing now for an organisation. But that meant I could build up my confidence. But I never said to them, this is what's happened. I just said I'm available for some HR work. But that really helped build up my confidence, myself. But I think to some extent it was the feeling that leaving a job you love is really hard when actually, you don't want to. Yeah. So during 2021, I carried on with the consultancy, still unhappily living with all this anxiety and panic, until I watched the Davina program, last year, and 2021 as well. And it was like, again, that light bulb moment. I thought, all these women are saying the same thing that I'm feeling, that panic, that anxiety, that feeling of not being able to work. And I thought, right, okay, I'm going to take back control. I felt really empowered. I thought, right, I'm going to go back to the doctors. So it was this time last year, it was International Women's Day, that's where I remember, I spoke to the same doctor. And she said to me, okay, you've had these symptoms, let's give HRT a go. And I was so emotional because I felt I was being listened to. I thought, finally, I can turn the corner now. And she said to me, go away and do your own research and we'll meet again, and whatever it was, a week or so later. This was all on the phone. And when we reconvened, she literally said to me, what have you decided on? And I thought, well, I think from my research, I need estrogen and progesterone. She said, okay, there's your, get your prescription. And that was the extent of the conversation I had. And I think for myself, it was the frustration of, I'm not a doctor. I've educated myself around sort of, hormones and symptoms and all that sort of thing. But I think we'll probably come on to in a bit about what I'm doing now is a whole world different, because as a result of that, I retrained as a coach in around May, June last year. And since then, I've gone on to do menopause awareness training, coaching program. And I think what's fascinating is I didn't know, looking back 2 years ago, that every single woman has a different menopause. 10% of women have left the workforce due to their menopause symptoms. So that's in the past, 10% of women. I'm one of those 10%. And I think, there's statistics about people being given antidepressants instead of looking at hormone replacement therapy or alternative treatments if they can't have that to some extent. And I feel so passionate now with the awareness that I'm doing, and I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through due to that lack of organisational awareness.
Amen.
So it's a long story.
Yes, it's a long story, and there's so much to unpack there. There's so many questions that are coming up in my mind that I want to ask you, because it's just, I think there are so many people who are in the position that you were in a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And they're quite desperate because they don't know how to deal with it.
No.
To stick it out, or and plow on, or or leave and do something different, or
Yes.
leave and don't do anything at all. You know,
Yes.
I've definitely met people who just feel incapable of working at all while
Yes.
going through this.
And what frustrates me is it's a hormone imbalance, you know, it's a deficiency. So if you went to the doctor and said, you know, whatever, or you're iron deficient, here's some tablets. And even last month with the women, and well, it's end of January now, that the Women Equalities Committee is saying that we're not going to make it mandatory for doctors to learn about menopause. I think, well, personally, I think it should be, because actually there's so many people out there struggling, and it's that lack of education at the doctors. I mean, another thing to mention is when the doctor said you're a bit young, she said, we'll do a blood test. And I was 45, and she said it's inconclusive. And I was like, well, I realized now it would have been because I was perimenopausal, but the guidelines have even changed since then. So if you're over 45 now, the NICE guidelines, doctors will talk to you about your symptoms. If you're under 45, they'll give you a blood test. So I think even in that short space of time, the awareness is there, but it wasn't for me. And I think that's why I feel so passionate about it.
Yeah. I can feel that passion. It's just pouring out of you, which is, it's lovely, because that's how we change things, isn't it? By being passionate about them, and talking about them, and then I guess helping other people to go through what we went through. So
yes, exactly. And I think that's the thing, because you know, when I first left work, I didn't put 2 and 2 together and think I'm leaving work because of my menopause. I'm actually thought I'm leaving work because of, you know, busy lifestyle, you know, grief. I've lost both my parents now, and I thought a lot's happened in a short space of time. It will pass, you know, it's complicated grief, or, you know, I had counselling. I mean, company were very supportive, and I had Bupa to have some therapy. And to some extent that did happen. But I remember even saying to my therapist, you know, I think I might be perimenopausal. And she said, you're a bit young for that. And I realised now, I thought her opinion mattered at the time, but actually they're not trained sort of practitioners around the menopause. So it's sort of, for everywhere I looked, I wasn't getting an open door to come and talk to me. And because I've been exceptionally independent all my life, you know, I've always sort of loved sort of doing things on my own. You know, I love going out for long drives or whatever. All of a sudden, my world became very, very small. I was fearful of everything. I was worried about the panic attacks. So I was fearful about the next one happening. And I realize now, if you're in a heightened state of anxiety, they're more likely to happen. But who could I talk to? You know, the doctor said you're too young. Work was supportive, but I thought I can't sustain this job. They're part-time. This is statistics everywhere happening, that women are leaving the workforce or going part-time. You know, there's a lot out there. I'm not alone. And I don't see myself as someone to think, oh, that's awful that happened to you. Because actually I can, you know, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now about sort of supporting women and getting them empowered to take back control, as I call it, take back control of those hormones. So
So what would your advice now, having been through this I mean, I guess you're still very much in the thick of it, and I know that you're constantly learning about menopause and how it affects women, particularly in business. So if you could give advice to yourself 3 years ago, what would it be?
I think for myself, it would be, it's a very good question, actually, because a lot's changed in the last 3 years. The menopause awareness is there. People are signing the Menopause Workplace Pledge, and there's a lot of companies doing menopause awareness. And I liken a menopause champion a lot of organisations have now as to the mental health first aid model about 5 years ago. So I think myself 3 years ago, I'd have probably needed myself as my best friend 3 years ago. Say, right, come on, we'll get this sorted. And for somebody to almost take control and look after me, because I felt I did a lot of it on my own. My husband didn't understand it. You know, he wanted to be supportive, but he didn't know what was wrong with me. The children were young, you know, life takes over, and you can't, I didn't have that time for myself. So I think the advice would be, talk to somebody at work, whether that's human resources, whether that's a menopause champion if in place, or talk to your manager and say, this isn't right the way I'm feeling. Go back to the doctors, educate yourself before you see your doctor. So you give that feeling of, I was quite intimidated by talking to a doctor. I thought, oh, I'm being silly, or they'll think, no, you're not. You know, you're just clutching at straws. But actually, if I'd persevered and said, no, I really do need to, you know, to have the conversation about HRT in my case. So I think it's the advice of getting people to support you, but also educate yourself, read books on the menopause. There's an app called Balance, you can download for free, and I think it's coming up to about 1 million people worldwide have used that. Is track your symptoms. So that means you can go to the doctor and say, look, I'm not ignoring it, every month at a certain time. And it's not just anxiety, which is what I had, it's all sorts of insomnia, brain fog. It's really, really common. That's as common as hot flushes, believe it or not. And I think that can be exceptionally debilitating in the workplace as well. So it's try and sort of get an all-encompassing support network around you, as well as educate yourself.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think for anybody that's sort of starting to go through or starting to experience the symptoms, it's to know that you're not going mad.
Yes. Yeah.
It's quite normal. And there are ways of dealing with it as well.
Yes. And also, you're not alone. I think I felt very, very alone. I didn't know anybody else that was menopausal. And if you fast forward 2 years now, I have so many people come to me now, friends and family members and so on, saying, I had an old school friend the other day saying, I saw you mentioned HRT Summer. Can you help me? I'm having awful panic attacks. She said, I was in the garden at 3 a.m, thought I was going to die. She said, I've gone on to HRT a week ago. Can you sort of tell me where you've been? I did another podcast recently. I sent her the link. She said, I listened to it in depth. It's hugely helped me. I have another friend I've known since I was a child who talked to her about the perimenopause. She said, I thought I was getting dementia. She said, after talking to you, I quietly went away, went to my doctor. I'm now on HRT and I don't get that brain fog now. She said, thank you. And I thought, I'm helping people through talking about it. There's a lot of people who are struggling.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, just a little while ago, you said that you felt intimidated speaking to the doctor. And, I think for somebody who's clearly very accomplished, clearly good at what they do, clearly very self-confident, which are traits that a lot of women don't have, let's face it. But actually for somebody like you, even somebody like you, to say that you feel intimidated is, it's worrying, isn't it, that women feel that way.
And I think that's the thing, because I wasn't educated enough to understand. I didn't know what the perimenopause was. I knew it's to do with menopause. I thought the perimenopause was when you didn't have periods anymore. That's the opposite. The menopause is one day in your life where you haven't had a period for 12 consecutive months. The average age for perimenopause could be 4 years. On average, it's 4 years. I thought it was hot flushes. As I said, I've never had one. The anxiety I thought was down to grief. And to some extent, someone said trauma can kickstart it. So I think with my mum dying suddenly, I think that probably started it. But I'll probably never know to some extent. But it's that feeling of actually feeling intimidated by talking to a doctor, because to me they're they're full of knowledge, they know all the answers. But in this case, and no fault to this doctor at all, but they said you're a bit young, because I suppose their guidelines would have said, well, at 45 you're a bit young. But actually, if you look at the stats, there's 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 and 1 in 1,000 women under the age of 30 will go for the menopause. So actually it could happen at any time to some extent. If you have surgery, if you go through, hysterectomy, for example, your menopause can be sudden and severe and happen overnight, and you don't know what's happening to you. And that's worse if it's sort of all of a sudden. So it is really difficult. Yeah.
Well, what I love though is that, you've turned a situation that wasn't ideal. You left your job and you've turned that situation into a positive. And like I said earlier, I can feel the passion and excitement radiating out of you, which is why I asked you to be on this podcast in the first place, because I think it's really inspiring to I guess hear people's stories where they've overcome adversity and they have then gone on to do something really wonderful. So can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing now?
Yeah, so thank you. So I retrained as a coach last year. It was actually an old colleague of mine I worked with in London. And I was saying about, well, what's my next move? And I'm starting to feel better on the HRT. And that, by the way, it wasn't overnight. So people say, oh, I felt amazing the next day. It took about 3 months. But bit by bit, I thought, do you know what? I feel absolutely great. I haven't had a panic attack, touch wood. I haven't had one for nearly 2 years, but I think leaving work actually really helped the panic. The anxiety was always there, but when I say about panic, that's very much about hyperventilating and, you know, really, really difficult. So anyway, she said to me about, have you thought about coaching? Because she retrained a few years ago, and I thought, oh, that's the thing, because I'd done coaching for years and years within HR. So it was something I did without thinking, but I thought, if I'm going to coach, I need to get a qualification. So I studied for a certificate in cognitive behavioural coaching, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I was really proud of myself. I had to do like almost like an exam at the end. It was sort of, you know, so many questions, so many words each. I had to really apply myself, and I passed it, which was great. But the first 20 years I'd studied, and I thought, do you know what? I can really make a difference. So I started to look at transformational coaching, and I've done a lot of that over the last few months. So I set my own business up relatively quickly. I did the course, finished July, and I set my business up from September. And I've looked at transformational coaching. So that was based around supporting women, whether it be with the perimenopause, whether it's to do with work-life balance, career transition, loss of confidence, hitting the glass ceiling, all of those little difficulties that women experience. But the menopause keeps finding me. People will ask me all the time about it, about coaching around it. And I think to some extent, that's probably where the gap is in terms of where people feel, am I perimenopausal? Where do I go with it? How do I get support from work? How do I get an action plan together? And that's really sort of taking off. I'm also doing menopause awareness with a leading organisation. So I deliver training for them. And I spoke to them last year.
Mention them if you'd like to.
Yes, they're called.
They're doing such wonderful work. I think
yes,
they need
fantastic.
to be shouted about, actually. So
but they're called Talking Menopause, and that happened last year. I was thinking about menopause coaching, and a good friend of mine years ago I used to work with said, what you need to do is go on LinkedIn, look who's doing menopause coaching, and people either want to help you or they'll ignore you. And that's exactly what happened. And there was one lady who's had menopause coach, and she said, oh, I fell into it. I'll put you in touch with one of the directors I'm doing associate work with. And we had a call, and as we were talking, you know, we were chatting away, and she said to me, would you consider doing associate work with us? And I was like, yes. I thought, you know, I couldn't think of anything I'd rather, you know, I just thought I would absolutely love to do this because it's my favourite subject, and to actually be an associate with a leading organisation. And they've been going for over 5 years. And if you imagine, we've all been on our own journey with the menopause within this company as well. We're very like-minded, we get it. And I think we deliver training programs to all sorts of organisations, you know, and I have done for years. And what I find empowering about it is it's imparting that knowledge that, you know, my own journey, which they encourage me to talk about, which I really enjoy, because actually I think it makes it personal. People can think, wow, she's been there, done that. But also every session I do, you find that there's a different group. You find out what they've already done in their organisation, but you'll find that everybody wants to get involved. They want to support. There's a lot of managers that want to support their team. How do I have the conversation? So I absolutely love that. It's so rewarding and empowering doing that. And then obviously I've got my own business doing the coaching as well. And again, it all seems to come together. But if you think it's only a year since I went on to HRT. So I started it 1st of April last year, which I thought was a bit of an April fool, but it is a date I remember. So really in that space of time from April to July, I got sort of, trained to be a coach. And then by September, I had my own business. And by September, I was working with Talking Menopause. It's all happened very quickly. Yes. But I think for me, I'm so passionate about it that I'm very much sort of, right, what's next? Where can I be involved? So, yeah.
Amazing. And if you compare what your definition of success was, let's say 5 years ago, when you're in the midst of your, highly successful career versus what it is now, has it changed? Yes, it has actually. I think my priorities have changed. I think 5 years ago, I've sort of looked at family life. My children were very young. I mean, they're only 6 and 7 now. But I think success would have been to me sort of juggling that work-life balance. I had a long commute to work every day. It was, successful, senior management role. And that to me was success, that I could maintain that. And if you imagine, the rug was pulled under me, not through my choice, by actually what happened with the menopause. So success to me now is looking at having my own business, but making a difference to other people. And that is happening.
you know, people will say to me, you know, that's been so helpful, and I can really see where I'm going with my menopause journey now. And it's difficult because I say every single woman will have a different menopause, so no woman will ever be the same. And I didn't know that before.
But you're never going to be short of work, because every woman will go through it at some point in their life, and
Yes.
you know, in some shape or form. So
And I think what's interesting is 80% of women will have symptoms, 20% won't. So that 20%, and someone said to me early on, oh, I sailed through mine. And I thought, well, that's good for you. But if you're not, if you're really struggling, you know, the 20% of people that really struggle with severe symptoms like me, it's that awareness of actually, if you sailed through yours, keep that to yourself. So that's not going to help that person. And I think it's, you know, I'm very conscious. I don't want younger women to be fearful, to think I'm dreading the menopause. When it happens, it's going to be awful, because by then that tipping balance will be there. The doctors will have the information. There'll be a network around you with friends and within work to say, you're not yourself. Have you thought it might be this? Because sometimes women don't even know that's what it was. In my circumstance, there won't be a shortage of HRT. And also that open conversations to actually let's talk about it. And when I do talk about it to people, networking groups, whatever, people are like, oh, I had a terrible time myself. People want to talk about it, but it's almost this taboo, like, oh, we can't discuss that. That's not something we talk about. And it's not just about periods. I think a lot of people think that's what it's about. You know, it's a whole realm of you know, symptoms. Different symptoms, you know.
More than 40, I think.
Oh, there's loads. I mean, I talk about sort of unusual ones that I've personally had. I didn't have just the one, of course. I had to have more, but I had I still get vertigo sometimes, and when I first got that, I thought I was going to collapse. It was vertigo. I realize that now. And when it happens, it's brief. But if you know what it is, you think, okay, it will pass. If you don't know what it is, that's frightening. I had plantar fascia in the base of my foot. That's a buildup of estrogen. Didn't realize that. Was hobbling around, too anxious to go and get it sorted. Did eventually. Tinnitus in my ear, thinning hair, itchy skin, all that sort of thing. I get that quite regularly, but I know what it is now. And I think it's okay. It's those hormones again. But if you don't put two and two together, you can think you're going mad. You know, brain fog again, I sometimes have, and that's, you know, you can't think of someone's name, it comes back to you. But if you don't know what that is, you can become fearful, worried, anxious. You know, a lot of women are in senior roles at menopausal age. They're walking away from work due to lack of confidence, like myself. So, you know, there's a lot there.
Yeah. And it's a shame, because you've worked very hard to get to where you are. And if you love what you're doing, it is, you know, it's really sad to have to leave it.
Yes, and I remember when I left, I was looking at this change curve, and it said about there's a level of anxiety when you change, and I thought all I've ever known is HR. I hugely enjoyed it over the years, and it was one of those places I worked before where I looked forward to going in every day. Every day was different. There's not many places like that, and it wasn't, you know, my choice. I didn't say, oh, I'm going to leave and so on. I didn't have a choice, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So in hindsight, it's a blessing in disguise. It just took a while to realize that. So
but you've made it a blessing, you know. I think
yes,
it's, you know, we make our own luck to an extent, don't we? And I think you've used your just positive attitude towards it all and made it into something positive.
And I appreciate you saying that.
Sorry?
I appreciate you saying that. So if you'd seen me, say, a year ago, I was a shadow of my former self. I felt very isolated and alone. I'd lost that lust for life. And sometimes when you go online and see people put like quotes on, and I remember you know, saving one once saying about you know, you won't always feel like this, you know, the light will come again or something. And I felt, that's why I sometimes say there is light at the end of the tunnel. I lost myself for quite a long time. Didn't have that lust for life, say fearful of everything, worried about going anywhere. And when you feel like that, I'm resilient, but when you lose your independence, I think it's probably the best way to put it, like I did. It's a horrible feeling, because I don't want to feel like this. And now I feel back to my old self, and a better version, dare I say it, than actually. That's why I'm so passionate, because I want to help others to actually think there is light at the end of the tunnel. You can get that person back. And when you do, you just appreciate yourself even more than you would have done before.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So anybody listening that's feeling like they're not the person they used to be, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes,
and just
there is.
Get the help, because it's out there.
Yes. Yes, and someone spoke to me recently, and I said the same thing, and they said, I want to get back to being that person. How do I? I said, you will, but it takes time, and I think it's building back your confidence, especially if it's sort of around sort of psychological symptoms. You know, a lot of people, for example, if they get heavy periods, that's really debilitating. You can lose your confidence with that, but if it's sort of anxiety, panic related, you do become fearful of everything. And as I say, my husband would have to go on school runs with me every day. Some days I didn't want to get out of the car, I was too anxious. And of course, when my son started school and his symptoms started, I didn't know really any school mums. Luckily now I've got a lot of friends. I am quite private, so it's taken me a lot to actually speak out, but I'm so glad I have, because I think if you keep it to yourself, how can you actually share that knowledge to other people to think I'm struggling too? So it's been a change curve for me actually as well.
Yeah, amazing. So if anybody's listening to this, and whether they're perimenopausal or not, and they're thinking about a career change for whatever the reason might be, what would your advice be to them?
I think, I'll be honest, I think you'd have to have an idea of what you want to do. And I would suggest doing a business plan. Because I think for me, I'll be honest, mine landed on my desk. I didn't, plan on coaching to some extent, because I wouldn't have seen that as the next step. That's because someone said it to me. But if you have an idea, I think I've always wanted to do that, I think 9 times out of 10, you'll never regret it. And, I've known people do different things like leave teaching and go and do something else. And I said, oh, what's the worst that can happen? You can go back into it. Yeah. But I would say that you'd have to have some level of financial backing. Maybe for sort of 6 months, to make sure that you've got time to set your own business up. Do your research, do market research. If it's something new, you could think, well, who can I ask? Is that something you would buy or need? But I think life's short as well. And when you sort of have a difficult period in your life, you think actually, if you've got the opportunity to do something, as I say, get your business plan, do your market research, but actually just go for it. I don't look back now and think, I wish I was sitting in an office every day. I can do the school pickups every day. I've got, I can work as and when I want to. I'm sort of freelance, that's the joy of it. And I think you won't look back and regret it. It's just sort of take it by the horns, think, right, okay, what can I do next? Because actually, if you still have that idea and you've been doing your career for 20 odd years, then actually you can do something new. And I'm proof that you can. So
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is exactly why I'm doing these interviews or these chats with people, because I want people to know that it's okay, you can do it, and it doesn't have to be this massive leap into the unknown. You can plan things, you can prepare, you can do your research, and you can take small steps into what seems like the unknown. But
and actually another thing to mention is I went back to my network in HR from going back 20 odd years. I had old directors I'd worked with, old colleagues, all doing different things. And I got in touch with them and said, I want to do this coaching. What would you recommend? And I had so much advice. Ask people.
Fantastic.
Ask, because I had a whole realm, like, people either ignore you on LinkedIn or want to help, join local support groups, networking, build your network up. And that's actually what's happened with me. And then that's the thing, people get to know you and doing different things, but ask people to support you, because they'll want to help you.
Yeah, most people want to help.
Yes, exactly. And the ones that don't want to help probably see me as competition, but I'm not competition. We're all doing it for greater good. So absolutely. There we are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If you've been inspired by Louise's story and you want to make a change, then you can go to yescareercoaching.com, and then you'll find out about the next program that I'm running. I run lots of group coaching programs for people who are thinking about making a change, and come along if you are thinking about it. But thanks again so much, Louise.
No, I'm delighted. Thank you for asking me. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.